Welcome again to Digging Deeper, YEG's Development Chat, brought to you by Clarity Development Advisory. I'm Dave Onashenko.
I'm Ranon.
And today we're going to have some fun. This topic was brought to us by one of our viewers the last time we did this. Now, we've been away a bit, a little bit of vacation, summertime. But great topic idea. Ranon, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, I also thought it was an awesome idea. We're talking today about our budget wish list for the City of Edmonton.
So what's happening? Why are we doing this now? I thought we talked about the budget. Didn't they vote on the budget a couple months ago, or what happened?
Did they vote on the budget a couple months ago? I thought they're voting at the end of this year.
So this is the planning for the 4-year cycle
right.
of the budget, right?
Yeah, 2023 to 2026.
Yeah, and so this is long-term planning for operations, capital budget, things like that. And
Correct.
then there's annual discussions too about refining that. So budget wish list, great topic idea. So each of us came with a couple prepared wish list items, right? That's what we're going to do today. Why don't we talk a little bit about the background first? We have a little bit of background information here about budget. So budget, this is from dollars that come from property tax, from user fees, from a large amount of things, and the city controls that, and it's divided up into operating budget, so ongoing, operations.
Yeah.
There's the capital budget, buildings, infrastructure,
Yep.
new rec centers. There's the waste services, and then there's also a Blatchford utility, which is an interesting line item. And that's probably the fact that the city's playing a bit of developer there too with some of that. So I'm not sure about that one, small item. But
in general, I guess what you find day to day when you're talking about a city budget as opposed to a federal budget or a provincial budget is this is a lot of the stuff that you experience day to day. These are your roads. These are your bike lanes. These are your development related things.
These are the services that you use. I mean,
Yeah.
20% of the budget alone, the annual budget, is police and fire services combined, right? There's neighborhood renewal, there's traffic management, there's things. And so this is one reason actually why I love municipal politics.
Yeah.
Because it is some of the most practical, like you said, day-to-day things that people experience. Went from the second that they put their garbage on the curb and it gets picked up, to they're walking on their sidewalk, to their utilities, to the rec center they go to.
Workspace. Everything.
It's all around them. So let's get into a little bit about I guess some of these things here. So there's we talked when we posed the question to each other, what are some of your wish list items? And I've thought about some of these bigger capital expenditures that I wanted to see funded for a while, that seem to be stuck forever, and then some of them have been funded, or some of them are going to be funded. And I was thinking of what was it, Columbia Avenue, so 105th Street, kind of behind Nate in the North Edge. For years, it was supposed to be a great project. 105th Ave, sorry.
Yeah.
Great project. Development started ahead of it, and it was, it was stuck. And the developers who started building some of those buildings said, "Hey, where's the infrastructure you promised?" And so finally, they're going through and doing that now. And there's a couple other things like that, but we're looking at some of these things that don't have funding now, and things that we're hopeful for the future.
Yeah, and it's a little bit we're not taking any actual financial considerations into this. We don't have budget numbers or anything like that, but it's more so a little bit higher level and visionary. Where do we see things going, and what are we interested in seeing over that period of time based on where we're at today?
Yeah. So this is that's great. That's a big asterisk. We don't have all the details. Yeah. So this is you weighing in as a viewer, provide feedback right now while it's live, or feedback after in the comments, or suggest someone who might have some more information as well. Yeah. But this is about changes to our city in a physical construct, or maybe even in just a makeup of governance or something like that.
That's it. Yeah.
So I will let you take the first stab.
Right.
What is one of your wish lists for the next 4-year budget, the 2023 to 2026 4-year cycle?
Yeah, and I will start that, but one thing I wanted to say is, if there is anybody in the chat who has ideas, please put them out.
Great
we-
feedback.
We want to hear them.
Yeah.
We want to talk about them too. Dave and I can talk for hours, but we'd love to hear from you too. So, but I'll give you my first one, and this is one that's been a hot topic of conversation over the past, I'm going to say, 3 or 4 years in Edmonton, particularly in the infill context. And I think this is growing in terms of at least in our industry, that kind of a discourse around it and the importance around it. And that is to do with infrastructure in areas targeted for growth.
Sure.
So the last 10 or so years, whatever it's been now, we've had this push for infill development, densification, and that's only accelerating with city plan, district planning, and what we're seeing is mature neighborhoods, central neighborhoods within the city start to see that type of redevelopment, anything from skinny houses to apartments to high rises to commercial redevelopments.
Right.
Everything. Like, there's just been a massive amount of change in the city.
Okay.
And the city has had intentions for that, ensconced in policy. Like, these are in your city plan, these are in even area structure plans. They're in all of that. Planning is one thing, getting it done is another.
Sure.
Right? Actually building it is another. And so when you talk to industry's looking at how easy is this going to be to do? How costly is this going to be to do? What challenges am I up against if I'm doing this?
Yeah.
Because frankly, we can say that there's tons of interest in industry to do these types of things. There's lots of people looking.
Yeah.
But what about the ability to actually get it done? And something that's come up is infrastructure in regards to fire flow, in regards to hydrants. You've probably heard about this at this point. Developers looking to sometimes do even a small project are getting dinged with requirements to build 1, 2, 3, 4 hydrants, a couple 100 meters of water line because it's insufficient currently.
By current standards.
And standards have changed through time. Like, we're looking at pipes that were often built 50, 70, 80 years ago and maybe haven't been upgraded all that much.
So that makes it difficult, like you said, for development to happen. Like you said, policy says, hey, go ahead and do this. We want you to do this. But then when you're comparing apples to apples and you take a new suburban lot for multifamily that has appropriate sized pipes and roads and everything right to the door, you can go ahead and do it all day, versus, say, an infill lot, you're tearing down some homes or an older business or whatever else, and then the city says, oh yeah, here's 1.5 million of additional costs that you have to put into your pro forma now.
Or just delete your pro forma because you can't do the project anymore.
Sure. And we face this with some smaller infill projects too. Small commercial, small townhouse projects where suddenly they say, actually, now this triggers the need for some of this infrastructure. And it has put things on pause in some cases. And so, yes, the city has policy right now where they, you can apply and there's a certain amount of funding from EPC4 to do it. But you're right. So for your budget wish, you're saying the city to what? Pick target neighborhoods to redevelop their pipes to allow for this?
I was just going to get into that, yeah. So what I really think that item 1 on my wish list is identifying the infrastructure gaps in targeted neighborhoods for densification and redevelopment. So figuring out, number 1, what are those gaps and how are they impacting the ability to actually develop?
Okay.
And second, saying if these are high priority areas as per city plan, as per everything else, putting the money in to do it. And whether that's sorting out some sort of cost recapture mechanism for industry or what have you, actually getting that done will facilitate development. There's no doubt about it.
So how would the city then, to just play devil's advocate, how do you pick winners and losers? In terms
the
of
city picks winners and losers every day. We pick the location of LRT lines based on where we think things should go. Like we have said that within a 400 meter radius, 200, 400, 800 meter radius of LRT stations or major transit stations, we need to have intensification and we're willing to support redevelopment of these sites
Right.
and central areas, we've picked those winners and losers already.
Yes. And maybe by doing so, you can piggyback on some of that infrastructure investment that's already occurred.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're upgrading this roadway. We put in an LRT line. Start with some of these areas for some of that infrastructure.
Yeah, so I mean, Shirley, I think you've got that image there, if you don't mind putting it up. So you can see this is from the draft district plan for central Edmonton, and you can see kind of the hexagonal shapes on there. Those kind of show some of the major infrastructure gaps that the city's already identified in terms of fire flow. And here's the problem to me, though, right? Like, we've identified it, but we're also saying that this whole area needs to get densified. So where's the balance here? Where's the, like, effectively what you're doing is you're saying, okay, avoid these gaps and do your development. And it's probably not the best approach.
Yeah, and, you know, the city wouldn't, if there weren't roads there, they wouldn't say, yeah, go ahead and develop. Oh, you have to put the roads in, too.
That's it, and I was just going to bring that up. Oh, I don't need to extend the LRT to another block over. That's the city's responsibility because the city wants that. So, anyways, that's budget item 1.
Okay.
Don't want to belabor it.
No, great. I like it. I agree with it. I think it's an honest conversation we need to have about how that infrastructure, and we've seen it through neighborhood renewal. But how about some pipes in the ground to allow for that in, you know, areas either where we don't have neighborhood renewal or that underground should be getting built too.
Well, a quick point on that before we move on is why didn't we just do it all at once? Right?
There you go. Okay. As Ranon said, again, I'll say if you've got ideas in the chats, pop them up while we're talking right now, and we'll be sure to mention them and talk about them too. My first point, Jasper Ave redevelopment. So, what this is, there has been kind of 2 plans, and actually, if you want to throw that up, Shirley, we can look at this here. 2 plans over time with a unified vision of redevelopment of Jasper Ave. The first one was the Jasper Ave new vision, and that's in orange that you can see there. And that was from 92nd Street to 109th Ave, and that was first approved in 2011. And then the other is Imagine Jasper, and that's 109 Ave out to 124th. And so that was a lot more recently. Now, both of these serve kind of the same goal, is infrastructure redevelopment. That is both replacing crumbling infrastructure for automotive and pedestrian use, wider sidewalks, bulb outs for narrower pedestrian crossings, boulevard trees, landscaping. And actually, let's throw up some of these images. These are some images, renderings done for the Imagine Jasper, so that's west of 109th. And I think ISL had worked on this. And this is some stuff that's actually been built. Obviously, the trees are a lot more mature than's been planted now, but this phase completed in 2011. This is at 1/10, kind of by the rail yards area where the park is, and kind of an interesting bike crossing. But great infrastructure that is well needed, long overdue. And so what we have for the Jasper Avenue Vision area, the first approved portion was phase 1 between 100th Street and 102nd Street. So right downtown on Jasper there. And that started right after it was approved. And that coincided, they did it because they had replaced the roofing of that LRT station. It was leaking.
Remember that,
But then it was effectively put on pause, and it's been 11 years since then. They're doing a little bit east of there between...
like towards the Shaw.
Yeah, exactly. A couple blocks east. But everything else, so from 102 to 109, and from 92nd, 96th is unfunded.
Correct.
So you have these little bits on our main corridor downtown that are done, look great, the rest unfunded. So I'd like to see the city start to move on that. And so I should say the Imagine Jasper portion, they finished one portion, 5 blocks, 109th to 114th. Looks really good. Just finished that last year.
I love it. I live right there, so it's
exactly.
it's just they did a marvelous job with it.
But through the rest of Oliver, going west, unfunded, and that needs to be considered. It's $40 million for the remainder of that portion to go from 114th all the way to 124th. I don't have a dollar item on the rest of the Jasper Avenue Vision throughout downtown. But I'd really like to see that done. And this isn't just all for pedestrians or whatever else. It's for automotive infrastructure. It's for everything. More complete neighborhood that is, much more pleasant to be around, looks better, and sets the stage, the build it and they will come, for a lot of the planned redevelopment along there. There's tons and tons of apartments planned, but it goes hand in hand with the infrastructure. So that's my wish list, council. Anyone, if you're listening, please put some dollars into that, because I'd love to see that fully built out and see that plan complete.
And I think a lot of people would probably agree with you. You can see this stark contrast even at 114th Street, where it ends, and 115th. One side looks like a beautifully designed sort of urban realm, great work even through the roadway and everything else, and then you've got like crumbling sidewalks on the other side of the road, and I mean there's developments that also are in the hopper that are coming that will help, but it would be great to see.
And even the landscaping alone, you notice that in that portion, so added greenery is always great too. So that's it, short and sweet. That's my first wish.
Number one. All right, I'll give you number two then. This one's a little bit more ill-defined and hard for me to exactly place, but it's one that's focused more on the affordable and supportive housing challenges that we are facing today.
Okay.
And I think it's something that's become evident to a lot of people, especially through and sort of post, if that's correct, COVID. In this current world that we're sitting in, we are very aware of some of the issues, I think, locally, in terms of homelessness, houselessness, challenges with people being able to afford housing, and everything else. So what is the budget point on that? Again, hard to define. The city obviously has been involved in this world to some degree. There's also sort of federal jurisdiction on this as well. The federal government funds through the National Housing Strategy quite a bit into sort of affordable housing and everything else. But what role does the city play, and why might that role need to be expanded? Number one, local context is important. As a local municipality, you understand the challenges that you're facing. You understand what the needs actually are a little bit better than at the federal level.
Sure.
Secondly, you can understand some of the challenges that you're going to face in neighborhoods, from NIMBYism to everything else, from local zoning issues, policy issues that are supportive or unsupportive of certain types of development. Now, it's not a free-for-all, right? It's what is important to do. And the number one thing that I think needs to be identified right now is what are sort of the city barriers, municipal barriers to rapid housing supply in Edmonton. And we talk about this all the time. What are some of the ways of solving affordable and supportive housing type issues?
Right.
Housing supply is part of that conversation, for sure.
You've heard me beat on that drum.
Beat on that drum before, probably on digging deeper before.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really believe we need to identify some of those municipal barriers and put dedicated resources towards doing that. Until we know what some of those are, it's hard to move forward.
Yeah.
So we've seen some great projects lately, but even some of the modular projects, at King Edward Park, and they're in Inglewood. Is that in Inglewood? I think so. And some others. But I think given the challenges we're facing today, there's this significant and evident need for just more funding, more financing, more eyes paying attention to this. And yeah, that's largely it. And I think in terms of kind of the results, what are you hoping to get out of this at the end of the day? I mean, number one, at the most basic level, is an equitable city, a city that people can afford to live in. There's enough housing supply, people can find a place to live. But then beyond that too, building and sort of changing the narrative around urban areas in in the city, which have had challenges, especially in the last couple of years in downtown, other central areas that, as they vacated during COVID, people started feeling, whether it's true or not, but sort of the perception of safety issues, lack of attractiveness, and some of these things just go hand in hand, right? You put people in houses, they are more likely, and this is well researched through Housing First and everything else, but you put people in houses, it's easier for them to find stable jobs, contribute back to the economy, and ultimately sort of improve your urban environment. So more interest in housing, truly. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I mean, I'm going to get into this a little in my next point, but part of the I think you hit on it, especially the city's ability to have that local context and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
To what role are city finances and city budget? Is it municipal responsibility versus, some of this has largely been funded federally, even provincially.
Mm-hmm.
Is it through a matching program? Is it through directing some of that initial research and then looking for, the federal dollars or provincial dollars to feed it? Is it on the operational side? I mean, often the city's not operating, but what do you think?
It sort of coincides though, right? Like there's multiple actors at the table. Whether you'll hear this all the time. People will say this is a federal area. This is something that federal government funds and needs to be the one paying attention to.
Right.
Yeah, but it's built in your city.
Yeah.
And it's built according to your city regulations and your city zoning and your everything else like that. It's a city process too, right? There's no one body that can solve this issue.
Right.
I mean, there's $40 billion of funding into the National Housing Strategy. Do you see it? Do you see that working at this point yet? No, it's a partnership. It's something that people need to work together on at multiple levels of jurisdiction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I like it. I think it's good. We've seen some evidence of that, but continue to be needed. And as you kind of said too, the local context is important. The affordability conversation and the housing needs is very different in Edmonton than it is Vancouver or Toronto, right? And the hard to house, underhoused, that's maybe more of a focus where some of this conversation is versus general affordability. I mean, it's
a systems process, right? Yes. Like each part, like if there's different parts of this system, we don't fully understand all of it. I don't think anybody does how these factors entirely relate and push people to the streets or anything else, but it's complex and you have to attack it from a variety of angles. Yeah,
good stuff. Okay, well,
number 2 for you.
Number 2 for me, and this is the last one where we'll end it today. This is gonna kind of flip it on it, but I'm gonna say fiscal restraint is my wish for this coming budget. And right after I said, hey, here's something you should spend money on.
Yeah.
So I think infrastructure projects are important. The city has spent a considerable amount of time over the past 15 years or so making up for some austerity measures in the 90s and budget cutting. We were avoiding paving crumbling roads in the 90s to save $1, and then it was costing us $5 a couple years later to go in
tear
and
the whole
it.
thing up because we weren't just resurfacing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is important. We've taken on municipal debt for infrastructure projects that have been manageable through municipal bonds and everything, and I think that's great. The services that the city provides, I think, is important, to the rec centers, to the transportation, to everything else. My concern is kind of the slow drip of ever-increasing operating budgets that's saddled on residents and property owners in Edmonton. And this is inflationary. This is through the addition of new programs and projects and everything like that. And so what do I want? I want council to stay in their lane. So what do I mean by that? I mean, avoid taking on roles and responsibilities that should be outside of the municipal government's mandate,
Okay.
And part of that is pushing back on provincial downloading. We've seen it happen for the past, a considerable amount of time to make provincial numbers work.
Yep.
The downloading of responsibilities on municipalities.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a little indirect too. So it's halting funding for servicing, or it's not indexing that funding to inflation.
Yep.
And then as things continue to rise, the cities have to make up the difference.
Sure.
So we need money to pay for the continuation of services and of infrastructure, and that needs to be maintained. The next budget cycle here, there's already $3.83 billion that have been attributed for new projects, like new capital expenditures, the Valley Line West extension, the South Capital Line LRT extension, the Lewis Farms Rec Center, zoo, new projects. So there's lots of things.
Yeah,
and
that's like what, 3,800 per capita over that budget cycle.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, some of this stuff's like, I know we had looked at before here, like Valley Line right now in the 2022 budget is 1.9% of the budget. So it's small compared to some of these larger ongoing operational budget items, but these things stack up. And as a resident, as a property owner, as a senior who's seen their place appreciate over time and they're on fixed incomes, and suddenly they go from paying, a couple thousand to many thousand, $6,000-$7,000 a year in property tax and can't afford it. Council, I think it's their responsibility, and they need a bug in their ear to say, this isn't free money, and that we collectively pay for it, so there needs to be fiscal restraint with every decision made. New rec centers like the Lewis Farms, that's great. There's been a lack of rec centers in the West, and it's needed to have that support that the same one like, Clairview or Meadows got and everything else. Absolutely. But it's the balance between nice to have and need to have. And we provide great opportunities through River Valley Trails to everything else, but it's not an empty piggy bank. At the end of the day, it's the residents that pay for it.
Yeah.
And some residents are, more capable than not. So we talked about equity before. Fiscal restraint has a role in, that equitable conversation too.
Yeah, sure. So tell me this: where are some of the items of fiscal restraint that you'd be interested in?
I think it's some of these anything new that comes. Ongoing operation, indexing it to inflation, that's important. We want to make sure that road is maintained, those pipes are maintained, that rec center is maintained so it doesn't crumble and it's a big bill.
Yeah. And
there's modernization, and there's population increase and new services and provisions that need to be accounted for. I don't have the answer. It's when we say, hey, we need this new thing, this new and shiny thing, I think there just needs to be a pause. There's a great new park that's planned for downtown Edmonton. That's being funded through the CRL, that came with the arena. That's already funded, and that's great. There's a lack of that downtown green space, and there's tons of planned purpose-built rental going around that park with the properties surrounding it, and some of those decisions could have been influenced and likely are. I mean, it's being advertised, the Pangman and McLeod project as the parks or whatever else because of the views on it. It's great. There's economic benefit for some of these nice to have projects.
Of course, yeah.
But so I don't have an answer for you, and you're not going to call me out here to say axe this project or whatever else, because I think there's a lot of good some of these smaller things. Like I pulled out the Jasper Avenue. I think that's good. It leads to future investment.
Sure. Here's where I'll try to point you a little bit. When you're looking at a rapidly growing city in terms of population over the next 25, 30 years, how do you sort of, quote unquote, index your property tax growth and ensure that those new citizens coming in are also supported through programs and services and everything else? What is, like, how do we think about that? How do we ensure that we have provision for the things we need?
Well, and this has come up at the city level, and this is a bit of a diversion here, but as they plan for new neighborhoods, for example, too, there's expenditure plans that, and I forget the exact term the city uses, but it looks saying 25, 50 years down the future for everything we're building here, this new neighborhood, it's going to require this much in terms of servicing, updating these roads. So the initial developer puts in, those first 2 lanes of the arterial, builds the infrastructure. But what is the city on the hook for long term versus the property tax dollars that's going to come in too?
Right.
So the city goes through some of this exercise, and it's important. And there's departments at the city that do this. The reality with any government, it's short-term lenses they're looking at, right? So it's important to have that administrative eye that's looking long-term, and the citizens that keep them in check too, and not just that short-term election cycle.
That's a really good point.
What is new and shiny, and my concern is what happens in this short period of time. And I'm not discounting our councillors. They're great, and I'm sure that they care deeply about the city, but you have to be able to sometimes make those decisions, have that fiscal restraint sometimes too, but make the decisions thinking long term. If I say yes to this $20 million project, what is the additional costs going to be, or that the city is saddled with long term? If we say yes to funding this program that is outside of our current mandate because they're coming and looking for help, what is that window that we're going to be tied to that program, and what does that mean long term? Things pile up over time, and I think we just need to, with everything that comes, be careful. And councillors have a big job. And like you said, they pick winners and losers.
I'll give you one example that would be maybe a debate for a future day, but how about like the Stanley Milner Library downtown here, where they did this redevelopment project, bringing it up to 2022 standards. They crack the building open, find major, I believe, structural issues in the building that are going to push them way over budget. And what effectively happens is an exercise in value engineering, materials, quality drop, and finish drop, and now you've got this functionally effective building that is effectively the laughing stock of downtown central Edmonton, which, it, rather than spending the additional $20 million to maintain the finishes, maintain the number of windows, now you've got something that people say is not attractive, doesn't make for a great downtown area. How do you balance that?
Great question. And I mean, as someone involved in the development, design, industry and all that, I lean more towards the answer saying spend the money. But it has to be taken with, especially if you are, to use the poker term, if you're plot committed at that point, right? Your money is in. Are you going to end up with something that you don't like and you're saddled with for a long time? But it has to be taken with a grain of salt with everything that I just mentioned, right? I won't point out the municipality, but I can think of a rec center in a municipality within Alberta, let's just say that. And I think there's a couple examples where they said value engineering it all else, we're going to save the tax dollars and make it work, right? And they're left with a barn that looks like a warehouse, and with metal cladding on the outside of it, and you wonder, like, are we going to an industrial park or what, right?
Are you attracting people to your city, or
and,
being
the city's gone through this with some, and they, the pendulum swung the other way in a lot of cases too, with a lot of the new rec centers and libraries and everything they built. And I think that's great because some of these things are statements, they showcase what the city is, and residents we all own it. We're residents and we get to use it, and we're effective owners of this. It builds city pride, it's versus, hey, we go in and here's our, warehouse looking thing. Yeah, hey, it was cheap and I pay, $2 less in property tax a year, but I don't want to go there. So in that regard, I veer a little more on one side than the other, but great point. Good discussion point.
This was awesome.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
We took a little more time than usual, but hey, I like these conversations. Hope you guys liked it too. Like I said, if you guys want to put some stuff in the comments, we respond to all our comments and live comments too. Thanks again for joining us. Join us in a couple weeks. We're going to do this again. This is fun. And if you have any topics, suggest them. We'll be sure to respond.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks very much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.